Steve, it's just you and me, buddy.
Hello, my friend.
Just you and me.
Just
two
half of the numpties.
Yeah,
just
we're
numps.
only, maybe that
Or
means we're half as dumb.
Numpty stumpies.
Yeah, stumpty numpties. Man, a ton of shit has happened since we talked last. Yeah. So first we had this massive reorg on BSV. What are your thoughts on that now that it's come and gone?
I think it's a big deal. And I think it was wise of them to push out gigabyte blocks shortly after that happened to steal the news cycle, because I think it was a substantial damage that was done to BSV. And the idea that it's, it's in the past, they just reorged the reorg, no big deal. Developers took care of it. It's like, hang on a second, guys. Do we know exactly what just happened? We had centralized development intervention. By declaration, the devs said, okay, that chain, which has more proof of work on it, is now invalid because the people didn't play nice according to my rules, even though they just added more hash power and they followed Nakamoto consensus. So we're going to have a manual override to plug in our new chain, which has less hash power, but we like the people more because they play by the rules. Okay. Now, maybe that was the right decision for them to make. It probably was, but that establishes the principle that we are not playing by Nakamoto consensus anymore. It's Nakamoto consensus plus a bunch of unwritten social rules about what honest miners means. It's not just hash rate, it's something else. It's some cultural thing in addition to the hash rate.
But that's always been the case. And that's inescapable.
Sure. They just can't lie about it now.
Yeah, I agree. That doesn't even bother me as much. The idea of the whatever the consensus is supposed to be, not Nakamoto, coming from the Bitcoin Association's Twitter account, that's sort of terrifying and ridiculous. But I have always assumed, and I've honestly been shocked. This is what I think has been one of the major problems with Bitcoin to date, and what led to all the shit with the horrible, limiting of the block size and all that. I've always assumed that miners would just figure out, hey, it's in our self-interest to have a means of communicating with each other than just the chain itself, and some kind of system of signaling, asking each other questions. I mean, maybe it's literally just picking up a phone. Because they understand, hey, if we're all mining this thing, right, it's not in our interest to let somebody do this malicious, 100 blocks deep that has this. So like miners coordinating to kick off the bad ones off the network, even if they have more hash temporarily, or more, more proof of work temporarily, whatever. I don't mind that. And I think that's actually inevitable. And in fact, I would argue that's good. And if miners would have behaved more like that from the beginning, I think Bitcoin would never be split into forks. I think it just have a bigger blocks.
But that's not what happened, right? I don't know, but I don't think this was coordinated by miners. This was the Bitcoin Association. This was the central development team saying, okay, we're going to intervene. This is what you can do. It's not like, I don't think it's behind the scenes communication among miners that, okay, we're going to have a separate amount of hash,
I agree. Like
to handle attacks like this.
Miners see this happening and they start talking with each other and saying, all right, what the fuck, what do we, what do you want to be? And of course they're not all like, they're in competition. So they have to be skeptical and make sure that, the other person's not lying, whatever. But I like some kind of, conversation around that. I guess, the Bitcoin Association tweeting it seems really absurd, but I don't even mind so much some third party that's not a miner saying, hey, look, if you want to end this thing, this is here you go, do it this way. And if they agree, they agree. If they don't, they don't. That honestly doesn't bother me that much. It bothers the theoretician in me that wishes Bitcoin worked the way that I imagined it worked, where you didn't need all this other social stuff. But that since the first block size debate, since the Hong Kong and New York agreements, I've known that was not possible. There's just there's going to be a social element and all this other shit.
Can we say with confidence that there is no SHA-256 chain in which miners themselves, with their hash rate, determine the rules of the network? It just doesn't exist.
Like they could theoretically,
Yeah, well, I agree. They could,
but they
but
don't.
that's why I say it's
And that's
substantial.
where I'm saying, yeah, and maybe you're right in this case because it wasn't really the miners. That's where I'm saying I would prefer to see it evolve such that the way that consensus is determined, even if it's not just Nakamoto consensus, even if it is done by social blah 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 and backroom stuff, that it was miners taking the initiative in that rather than just
Right.
sitting back and letting random
Yes.
parties of Twitter trolls or associations just, and then they wait and they say, where's the
Yep.
where's the one that's going to be the least risky? Okay, I'll just do that. I don't give a shit, what about Nakamoto or about just taking an active role myself and trying to guide where this goes, which just seems weird. I feel like that's
Okay.
not in their, it's not in their long-term business interest. And eventually miners and these things like the Bitcoin Association, whatever, will start to become the same entity.
Yeah. Okay. Three things. One, I do think this is a bit quirky given the, what is it, 0.1% hash rate that is BSV. So I think at scale, it'd be less of a threat and we get more of miner control. Point two I want to make is, I'll make that point three because I want to talk more about that. But the second point is there is an interesting idea on BCH, the, what does he call it? The miner parliament. Have you seen this guy, Javier Gonzalez? He's a BCH guy and he's developed a way where essentially miners, there's like a Congress, and the Congress, it has how do you get a membership into the Congress? Well, you have hash rate, and the more hash rate, the more it's just shown up in the Congress, and you can make votes and that type of thing in the little miner Congress. I think that's an interesting idea, and I like the spirit of that because that's not, let's sit on our hands and wait for the developers to take care of it. That's like, okay, these are the people that matter. And they have their own thing where they can block out the outside world and try to negotiate, especially in a time of crisis like this. What exactly are we going to do? I think that's a cool idea in theory. Okay, well, yeah. Why don't you respond to that, and then I'll
Yeah, no, I'm interested. It's like part of it is sort of heartbreaking and disappointing that something like that is necessary, but that actually is probably a better way, because you would like to imagine that you don't need a bunch of people sitting around and hosting votes and having congresses. That's the kind of like horrible shit where you get politics involved and all this bullshit. You just want it to be a truly Darwinian hash wins. But it turns out even the people who have the ability to win with superior hash instead want to go listen to what everyone is saying and want to get a social consensus, right, and that's like, people just aren't willing to battle it out purely in the jungle, so to speak. They keep listening to people who don't have skin in the game. And so given that that's the case, right, you could wrap those two things together more tightly. Stop pretending like you're just letting it be hash while really it's people, right, who can easily manipulate these social environments.
Exactly. It cuts out the proof of social media because the way you get your voice heard is to have hash.
Yeah, exactly.
So it doesn't get around.
And you could try to persuade those with hash and tell them things,
totally,
and sign a petition and whatever, but they're going to go and they're going to use the hash to whatever, to have votes in this thing. There's something interesting about sort of formalizing what's basically started happening or what's been happening in an informal way, which is like hash plus social media pressure, right?
Right. Okay. And then the third point I wanted to make is, one of the other reasons I think this is significant is you really do have to trust these devs, and that means Craig Wright, who is maybe chief among them or very influential among them, to make the right decisions, including hard forks, as in when that block was manually added to their software. Now, if you're not running the updated version, you are forked off the network. And that means if they decide that for whatever reason, they're going to put a new block with new transactions that, give Craig Wright a bunch of coins, that is a real live risk that you run. Like that, just period.
If everyone just obeys it, right? Like if the miners all just go along with it. So like, yes, they have an incentive to go along with it if it's in their interest and if they perceive it's in the interest of the network, to the extent that the network's interest is aligned with theirs.
Yes, but
they
it's
don't have
still
they don't have an incentive to go along with it if they think it's the opposite, right?
okay. But here's the problem, though. The promises of BSV have been that the system is not going to break. No more hard forks. The system's not going to break. Yeah, that's with an asterisk, because at any point the system might break because there is a manual override for political reasons or legal reasons or whatever, and then that shit can break. That's just a reality of the circumstance I think we're in now after the 100-block rework.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think these assessments, they're always about the relative stability compared to the next best alternative, right? So like, it's true that the code is law, therefore you never have to worry. Mantra is stupid because humans maintain and can change the code. But trying to say, well, we'll get more stability by saying law is law and law will be and law is more stable than code. Well, not necessarily, right? Like, so you have to kind of weigh, given what the code is and the incentives facing the people who maintain it and what the legal structure is and what all these different things, what's the relative stability if I want to build on something, right? And into the future. So like the stability of BTC may appear pretty good in the near term, in terms of the protocol being sort of stable. But in the long term, it either must die or raise the blocks or raise the total supply. Like it can't. And by long term, that could be 50 plus years, but it must. They can't. So the stability is not there if you're building for a really long time. You know what I mean? Whereas BSV, the stability of the system itself, like it doesn't need to change to work in 50 years, but there's all these other factors, right? Like what's going to happen, development wise, or just being a minority chain. If it keeps getting beat to shit from attacks, well, that leaves a hole. Then maybe they could do anything to the protocol, right?
Yeah.
Who knows, as a defense mechanism. So there's a huge stability in that regard, instability.
Yeah, instability, and it's not Nakamoto consensus. It's got asterisks. And, I think people just need to speak honestly about the circumstance that we're in. Going around and pretending that this is just the Nakamoto consensus chain and hash solves it, not anymore. That was the past. There are no SHA-256 chains for which that's true anymore, period.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the same thing in the realm of politics. And if you've been passionate about liberty for long and you've looked at, ways that we can ensure and protect liberty and let people live more free, it's like, no matter how hard you try, you can't escape beliefs as sort of the ultimate thing. Now they're not the only thing, but they're the ultimate thing at the end of the day. So like, well, how about constitutional restrictions? Cool, unless nobody believes that constitutions matter, right? That's not going to restrict anyone in a culture that doesn't give a shit about a piece of paper. If they do give a shit about a piece of paper, it can actually work, but they can stop giving a shit at any point. So like, you can't say, cool, we no longer have to worry about the whims of people and their opinions because we have a piece of paper. Still got to worry about it. New technology comes along. Great. Now we don't have to worry about people and their whims and opinions and what's popular and what's cool because we have code and the code will just execute. Yeah, but people can fucking change the code and they'll do that based on whims and opinions and tweets and all this other shit. So like, you really cannot escape the realm of the role of what people believe. And that's why that's why the mythology is more important than the technology. So that's where BSV, the mythology around BSV, though it's very early and it could change, but it is about scaling on-chain, big blocks, and some of the things that that are baked into the mythology that like, if it deviated from that, it basically ceases to exist. That gives me more stability than whatever the protocol happens to be at any given time,
Yeah. And it's an interesting study in political power, non-governmental political power, because I feel like the dynamics of what happened in Bitcoin they show that if you have power in a political system, but don't know that you have power, then you don't have power. So like the miners still, it is in their power on BTC to fix everything like that.
Yep.
That they whoever has majority hash rate can successfully tyrannize all other SHA-256 chains out of existence if they wanted to. They have the power, but if they don't know that, they don't believe it, or they don't want to, then suddenly they've ceded their power to other groups. And I guess they're cool with, I guess they're cool with that.
Yeah, they're happy to just not play that game and to just keep doing it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Venkatesh Rao has this great book, which is actually about the TV show The Office, but he just uses that as a template to explain this, examples to explain this basic idea that the corporate structure of every corporation is this pyramid where you have sociopaths on the top, losers on the bottom, and clueless in the middle, right? And the clueless are the middlemen. Clueless are the people that believe all the bullshit. Okay, we follow the rules. They'd be the conservatives who believe the Constitution is going to limit government or whatever, right? And the sociopaths are the ones who are at the top manipulating everybody. And the losers are the ones who are like, we know that shit's not going to do anything. They actually have more in common with the sociopaths than either do with the clueless. But losers are basically like, I'm not going to go play the sociopath.
Not ambitious. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to clock in 9 to 5. Yeah, whatever. You're naive if you think you're going to go, give your speech in Washington D.C. and change the world like a clueless person would. But I'm just going to do my thing and put my head down, right? And the miners have basically, you would assume they would be the sociopaths in the system,
right?
And that the Twitter mob would be the clueless who are like, yay, it's all good and whatever. And then the like maybe nihilistic investors or whatever would be the losers. But the miners turn out to be the losers, and they're just like, we don't want to throw our weight around, right? Because that's the whole thing with this theory is that the clueless are this necessary buffer between the losers and the sociopaths. Because if the losers and sociopaths interact directly very much, the losers won't take it and they'll just take over, and there's way more of them, right? So the sociopaths have to put this middle management buffer in to be the ones that deliver the news, right? Which is Michael Scott in The Office, and to absorb the hatred of the losers and to protect the sociopaths. So anyway, instead you have the miners.
Pretty powerful analytical theory,
right? The miners. It's an incredible book. It's called the Gervais Principle, because Ricky Gervais is the one who wrote the Office initially, but. The miners are playing the role of the loser. They're not throwing their weight around. They're not trying to manipulate things. They're not trying to, for the most part, they're kind of just, we're just going to do it. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy bullshit. We're just going to keep getting our paycheck, right? And the clueless are all of the fans and supporters on Twitter, and the sociopaths turn out to be a small group of the developers and some of these social engineers on Twitter or whatever, which just is not what you would guess when you look at how much power miners have,
Right. The developers and whoever the developers are connected to, or whoever's financing the developers.
Yeah, the developers and whichever many thousands of accounts Greg Maxwell is running at any given time on Reddit and Twitter.
Well, hey, this is a good segue though. So to the large blocks now that came out on BSV, I think
that gives me so much faith because it proves that that they have the right mythology, that they would choose to say we must signal huge ass blocks right away because we need to reinforce the mythology of what BSV is all about and what it can handle. That gives me hope.
Well, that gives me hope too. It makes me very excited for a lot of reasons. Just to see blocks that big successfully out there already is like incredible. I've literally been waiting for this for years. And to see
I remember you and I, this was probably 2015 when I started trying to understand the economics and the technical side of block size and like, okay, well, how big could something be handled? What would happen whenever? And you're basically telling me that what's happened today, like, you're like, there's no reason that couldn't happen. And nobody else was saying that. Even big block people were scared of blocks that size for the most part. You know what I mean?
They were trying to be polite. Yeah. They didn't
so you
follow
get to
the
see it
logic
happen
of the
and you
system.
get to see yourself totally vindicated. That like, you did the
on a
math
fork
right
of a
in your head.
fork. Hooray.
Yeah.
A fork of a fork that just had 100 block reorg. Hooray.
Nothing says vindication like telling people, see, look at BSV. That vindicates me. BSV
drowning under the water. I was right the whole time. Well, one of the other reasons, though, that it's so encouraging is because of how it changes the miner dynamics. So it's easy for miners to be losers, and it selects for losers when all you have to do is run your little computer and get your little block reward, and that's the end of the story. When you have blocks where the transaction fees outweigh the block reward, that's a different dynamic, because now it's like there is more money to be made by figuring out how you can handle blocks this large. So that automatically draws the best miners from all other SHA-256 chains into BSV. The more, like, if we consistently had blocks where the transaction fees are larger than the block reward, that is significant. Even despite the 100 block reorg, that is significant. That changes a lot of things.
It's so huge, and it's funny. You saw some of this behavior. I mean, it's always hard to interpret with just looking at, you know, what gets mined and what happens on chain to like interpret it and give it meaning. But it appears you saw some of this behavior with, I think it was via BTC, that they mine on BSV, but they usually just mine like small blocks, you know, all the time. And they just kept doing that and kept doing that and kept doing that. And then all of a sudden, after enough of these big ass blocks that started to have some substantial transaction fees, via BTC started mining big blocks. And it was like they finally figured out.
Yeah.
Like it took a long ass time, but they finally figured out there's money to be made here, you know?
So here's the thing. If this can continue, it's so significant, Isaac, because I think you can count on the miners, enough miners pursuing profit, that you are going to start stealing hash rate away from BTC. It's just, if there is more money to be made, that is where at least the best of them will go. And if you can keep that up, you know, it's much better to be on a chain that has increasing hash rate than decreasing hash rate. And it can continue indefinitely for as long as it is more profitable to mine on BSV. There will be more miners coming over to BSV. That's a big fucking deal.
Well, and that's where the, I mean, and there's so many benefits, right? Like say the price of all crypto is dropping in a market where the price is falling. If the number of transactions is growing faster than the price is falling, right? Like,
well,
there's
exactly.
only one chain that has there's only one chain that has the possibility for you to keep making more money, even if the price is falling. You know,
you disconnect the tracking of hash rate with price. That has been, I remember this was a really interesting debate. Like
and this is why, by the way, it's always pissed me off because it seems so short term that like CoinMarketCap and all these places, there's nowhere you can see 24-hour transaction volume on any of these coins. They're like sort by market cap, total bullshit metric, sort by price, sort by 24-hour change in price, you know? And I'm like, can you just add a stat for 24-hour transaction volume? Because if I'm thinking as an investor, any time frame longer than 6 months, I want to know, I don't care if it's a new shit coin or what, how many transactions are going on this thing? You know, even if they're fake, someone's paying for them to try to demonstrate something. That still means something to me. That's way more important than these other things. Because like you said, to separate, when you can make money off of economic activity, regardless of the speculation value, that's when you have something real as a miner, you know?
Yes, exactly. And I remember having these arguments. People were saying, well, does hash rate follow the price of the coin, or does the price track the hash rate? Because people were saying, hey, if miners are supporting the other chains, the Bitcoin Cash at the time, then the price will follow. And I think that was actually true for a window, which is why we saw, you know, at one point BCH was worth, I think, more than half of one BTC, because it looked like, oh shit, this might be the coin that is considered the official Bitcoin. So I think for
I'll never forget the excitement of that 24-hour period where it was like,
me neither. that was awesome. That was definitely an awesome moment. If we could have kept that up, like especially if they didn't implement replay protection and all kinds of things, that could have been better. But then I think it would have shown that the price would follow the hash rate. Maybe you could say, if hash rate is unified enough, price will follow hash rate. I think that's fair to say, because they can just destroy minority chains if they want to. If they're not unified enough, then maybe the hash rate follows the price. But since that happened in 2017, absolutely, hash rate has followed the price. And there's automatic ways that the miners they mine this chain, they mine that chain based on the immediate profitability of the chain. And so that means the price is fundamentally like connected to the speculators. And so the miners are making money based on how the speculators are valuing the asset. You go above that level when you have the transaction fees that are now doing the block reward thing. You're now having hash rate not follow the price. You could have you could have $200 BSV for the next 5 years. You could have majority hash rate on that chain because the miners are making more money following transactions.
No, I mean, like up until this point, it's been one of those things where it's like, if you're going to invest in why invest in a mining company if you can just invest in the asset itself? It's just another way, because if the asset blows up, your mining company stuff will blow up. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. If the asset dies, your mining company will die, right? If the price of it. It's just been another way to basically have all your chips in on the market price of whatever coin. And that's been how almost all of these, most of the products that are built on them, if you're a VC, most of them, it doesn't make sense to invest in them if you can just invest in the underlying asset. It makes more sense to buy Ethereum as a basket, right? Maybe you can get disproportionate returns on something built on it, but over the long haul, buy the index fund, right? And that's what it's been like with mining. But to say, no, this is actually something different. This is separate from the value of a mining operation, can be totally separate from the price of the asset, is so big. So that's where, so I know you and I were chatting in the other Numpties when the reorg happened. We were like, for fuck's sake, why didn't they just start with a different mining algorithm from the get-go? Because a minority chain is always going to have this problem. If somebody wants to kill it and dump several 100,000, whatever it is, like, that's such a huge risk. You should have just had a different algorithm. And the counter to that is always like, but that's admitting defeat. That's admitting that BTC won the SHA-256 wars and whatever. And I'm like, who gives a fuck? It already has. It's over. Just start fresh. And like, there is still an argument to be made for that. But I'll tell you, my excitement about that was way less immediately when these huge ass blocks came out and the block reward half or less of the, because I'm like, oh shit, okay, we can win this motherfucker, right? Like,
I feel you.
A lot of SHA-256 that can come over if the transaction volume can grow fast enough that it's like, and what are you gonna do if you're BTC, right? The only, if it's not about the asset price, at least the asset price is decreasingly a part of the equation for miners. Well, pumping Tether will only get you so far. So you got to all of a sudden figure out a way to get a shit ton of transactions on chain. Well, that means now you got to raise your blocks. And then even if you raise your blocks, then you got to figure out how to get a bunch of people building apps that it's already been 2 years on BSV and we're just starting to get something like
that's not even going to work.
You know what I mean?
That's not going to work because
it's too late at that point.
The volume is not going to make sense. So you got to have gigabyte blocks before, well, I guess this is not true depending on what the transaction fees are, but if you're going for low fee transactions, you got to have big ass blocks, gigabyte blocks, before you can get more in the transaction fee than block reward. So it's not just, hey, we're going to bump up our block size limit to 10 megabytes. So what? That's not enough. You'd have to go up 100-fold, 1,000-fold before you can get the same
activity to fill it.
Yeah.
And, trading alone, I mean, BTC could do a shit ton with trading alone. I suppose if the fees went way, way down, I bet BTC's activity would explode. But if we're talking about the kind of size blocks that make the block reward almost irrelevant, then we're talking about serious, massive applications, right? That you can't just all of a sudden flip the switch. If that has been impossible to build on BTC and they all of a sudden say, okay, we're removing the block cap entirely because we're scared we're going to lose all the miners, it's too late. You can't, you can't have a bunch of these,
And if you listen to the developers talk about people who work with the BTC code, the idea of small blocks is built into it. So like there's it's a rat's nest of code that is not going to get you big gigabyte blocks. You'd have to refactor them. You'd have to redo the whole thing. That shit isn't going to happen. So we're not going into that world where they're going to try to compete on low fee transactions. It'd be so funny, right? Because if we see consistent usage like this, then BTC is going to have to convince people. So if it's losing the miners, it's going to have to convince people to stay with BTC and keep paying these transaction fees indefinitely. So it's like they have such a huge ask ahead of them to say, you actually have to we have to make sure. So let's say it would play out 20 years in the future when the block reward's even that much smaller. In 20 years, it's going to be like, okay, there's either no transactions on this network or there's 2,000 transactions per block. And there's a very minimal block reward. That is a huge problem unless I guess you have pulled the wool over everybody's eyes and they're like, well, you just got to pay the $1,000 transaction fee to use central banking money. That is just such a, I mean, I believe anything's possible now after the past few years. Like we could be able to go into a crazy religious world like that. But I think that is very, very bullish for BSV to compete in that way, that they just can't compete on that metric.
And it's so important. It's so important for BSV or any other competitors to small block Bitcoin to continue to demonstrate what's possible. Because I think the Whig theory of history, we've all sort of grown up, sort of indoctrinated in it, whether consciously or not, that because we're children of the Industrial Revolution, and it's largely held true for this several 100-year period that we've been in, that things just keep progressing and they just keep getting better, right? But if you look at history, archaeology, whatever, people fucking forgot how to build roads as good as they were, for thousands of years. And there's all kinds of these examples in China where they had done all kinds of shit that then they forgot how good technology could be for hundreds or thousands of years. And so when I look at where we are now, I used to think, well, there's no way, like if the Lightning Network is this shitty experience that's really hard to use and it gives people horrible UX, no one will ever use it. No, it's actually possible that we have a world where in 10 years from now, everything's built on Lightning Network and it just works really badly. And technology is actually way worse than it was in 2005 or 2010. And people have just forgotten, and they just forget how good it used to be and how good it can be. I mean, we have this with air travel right now. Air travel is a far worse experience than it was 60 years ago. The planes don't go any faster. There's less food, less freedom, less quality. The airport is shittier than it used to be, right?
Now you're masked.
Now you're wearing fucking masks. You got the TSA feeling your balls, all kinds of stuff. It's possible that an inferior technology wins, or a technology that's even worse than the status quo wins, that actually makes things worse, right? Like that is not off the table, which is why if people forget what's possible, they will tolerate a lot worse shit. And so you have to keep showing them, not just telling them, showing them, hey, have this experience. And the first time you experience it, you're like the story I've told so many times of the guy who tastes chocolate for the first time, who was a kid in communist China. And he's like, I don't need to read any books about free markets. Wherever this chocolate came from, I need to go live there because I didn't know something that tastes this good was possible. And he literally risked his life to go to Hong Kong because he ate a piece of chocolate, right? So giving people that experience, and this is why and I'm coming around. I know this is very roundabout, but I'm coming around to the next topic I want to talk about. The response to these big blocks by everybody, but especially other big blockers. This is why it's so dumb when I hear people say, yeah, but it's fake. Somebody uploaded the same picture of a dog 1,000 times. It's not real activity. I don't fucking care. You got to show the world and show miners what's possible so they don't forget it and go down a road tolerating something far inferior to what was always possible with Bitcoin from the beginning.
Okay, I refuse your segue because that was a bunch of good points, and I got to respond to them.
I tried to hard fork, and you're not letting me.
Nope. This is a Sybil attack. Okay, so 2 points. One, though it is correct that technology can regress, this actually makes me a little bit optimistic because our experience is so strong that though people are going for the Lightning Network and they're paying fucking $10 transactions when they don't need to, that means they're not really rejecting big block Bitcoin. They don't know anything about it. They don't have the experience. So oh, did I lose you?
Just for a second, that you said they don't have the experience. They're not rejecting.
Right. The potential for that revelatory experience is always there. It's like, oh shit, what is this new technology? Even if it's 10-year-old technology, if they think it's new technology, great. We still have that possibility to convert people. Okay. The second thing that was funny though, is you're talking about the Lightning Network. Oh my gosh. So yesterday, JP Sears, the comedian guy. Okay. So he had a video on a social media tech that he's a part of. And oh my gosh, it just hurt me so much. It hurt my heart. I interviewed him on my show. I thought he was a really interesting feller, and but not in the domain of crypto. Oh my gosh. So so I guess he was talking to one of his, some, I don't know if it's his friend or whatever. And they were talking about this new social media platform called Zion that was going to be on Bitcoin. Totally brand new experience. The idea of putting social media and cryptocurrency together. I haven't heard that before, but he brought the guy on, the technical guy, and they were giving a speech to the crowd. And he was introducing how big a deal this technology is, and wow, you know, ownership of your data, and there's not going to be centralized parties. And the guy, the technical person, was like, yeah, we're building it all on the Lightning Network. And it's got to be on the Lightning Network because that is the future. You know, Bitcoin is the future. It's the only decentralized cryptocurrency. He was saying all of the words, all of the tone vase idiocies. He was just repeating them. This was the technical guy. He also dropped to this point to the audience. He said, "Oh yeah, it's, you know, Bitcoin has a finite supply. There are only 25 million of them." Blah blah blah. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't, don't even.
Wait,
so,
maybe he's right, and they already did raise the supply cap.
yeah. Not yet. Maybe someday. But it hurt my heart though, because I was like, okay, there is such a craving for what Bitcoin can actually offer, the real Bitcoin. They're like, oh yes, decentralized. This, you know, it was not. We're going past the company model. You're going to own your data. But the guy, and I thought, there is no way that this product is built. They're building on Lightning. There was a 0% chance this thing exists without a gimmick. And sure enough, they don't even have a beta. It's join our waiting list. I'm like, oh yes, join your waiting list. You did your little thing. You're probably trying to raise money because it's not going to work on the freaking Lightning Network. You mean to tell me that, and he goes, he pitches this as a benefit of the tech. He goes, look, this is so cool. When you open up your Zion app, you're actually spinning up your own Lightning node. Sounds great until you realize how the Lightning Net works. You're like, oh, so you mean to say that you're making an on-chain transaction when you open up your Zion account, and you mean to tell me that you're going to keep that node online indefinitely, otherwise you risk losing your funds? And how do you close the node? Oh, that's right, you make another on-chain transaction. So every time you open and every time you hit airplane mode on your phone, you now just made 2 on-chain transactions that cost you, $30. Yeah, it's not going to work, my friend.
Well, Steve, it's simple. You just never hit airplane mode on your phone, and you're good to go.
You just have to stay. Because
you're plug your brain in.
Exactly. Your social media app demands that you stay connected at all times. Otherwise, you lose your money, or you spend $20 or more every time.
That's even, people complain about like Twitter and Facebook, trying to like hack the human brain to make it more addictive. That's even better. It's like, if you ever log off of our social media network, you'll lose $200 that's trapped in it. You must stay on. Yeah. Talk about a sticky product,
Yeah, right. What's more evil, Facebook or that? If you literally close our app, we're going to take your money. It's not even it's hackers are going to take your money.
Well, and this is it's so hard to, because it is sort of like tragic when not every couple weeks, every couple months, you'll see somebody with a Twitter thread, and it's usually some big brain VC guy or something that's like, things are all moving to the crypto space. In the future, you will have social media that is completely integrated with payments channels. And you'll be able to do something like Lightning, where you click a button and a like could even be a few cents. And like the guys from Fletcher always, hey, it's already here, it's already here. And like
that's the thing. This guy was like, oh yeah, imagine sending a message was like a 3-cent transaction. I'm like, yeah, bro, that tech already exists. And it's also a shame because I don't think this is ever going to go to market successfully, obviously, because it's built on the Lightning Network. But imagine that it did. All of the time and the energy and the enthusiasm that went into this admirable sounding project is all going to be flushed down the toilet. And they're going to be like, oh, well, I guess the tech doesn't work.
Think of the human capital.
Oh my gosh.
BTC and then in Ethereum too, where there's just so many people with so much energy and so much, and a lot of them are like really good at like design and stuff like that, because there's some really slick looking stuff, but they're if the foundation is fucked, it's such a giant waste to build a giant tower on top of it, no matter how pretty it is. And to say, well, hopefully we don't know what the solution is, but we imagine that one could be invented in the future. So we'll keep building and pouring hundreds of millions into it. It typifies the times we're in, where literally the vast majority of activities going on are basically male investments. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it reminds me too, I was talking to my brother. So my brother was one of the co-founders of OpenBazaar, and they were trying to incorporate Lightning into their system, into their software. And Lightning's a shit show. It's always been a shit show. So anyways, talking about the many gripes that they were experiencing. And he said he was talking with one of the, I don't know, Lightning Labs developer people, one of the people working on it. Get this. Oh my gosh, it's hard for me to even say because it's so infuriating. Oh my gosh, these fucking idiots. Okay, so he was talking to the Lightning developers, and they were talking about the problems that they were encountering. High transaction fees on BTC, and with if your OpenBazaar account is effectively a Lightning wallet, well, there's a problem of on-chain transactions, like that costs money, a lot of money. And he asked the person, are you guys trying to are you trying to deal with the problem of the costs of on-chain transactions for opening up a Lightning channel? And she said, nope, that's not really something we're thinking about. I'm going, you mean to tell me that the people trying to develop the system have overlooked the most elementary thing you can look at when you're talking about the Lightning Network? It's like, oh, you have to make an on-chain transaction, probably a few of them over periods of time. There's no thought going into how to fix this problem? This is a systemic, massive issue. And they're like, yeah, we're not really thinking about it. It's like, okay, well, that's not going to work. This guy building on it, on the Lightning Network is apparently not understood how the Lightning Network works. So he's never thought to himself, I wonder if on-chain transactions are going to be an issue. Nah, they'll figure it out later.
There's such a tragedy too. I remember reading way back when yours.org first launched, and Ryan X. Charles sort of wrote about how they tried really hard to do it with Lightning Network, and just detailing, this is what it's like if you try to build something on this. It's literally just can't work for the business model, we're trying to do. And then they tried Litecoin and some other stuff. And it's funny, it's so tragic how like BSV and BTC sort of are like in the have the opposite problem. So look at something like Crypto Fights. I got on there today, and I don't understand the gameplay itself, because I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons guy, whatever. I just like click buttons and like shit happens. But the game itself, it's kind of buggy. It gets laggy sometimes. It's had issues. None of those are BSV network issues.
Right.
They're because the network allows you to do so much. They build this thing and they just don't have the dev talent, the resources, whatever, to keep up with all their demands. So they're hitting their own, as builders, their own scaling ceiling with their own internal shit. And they need more talent. They need more money. They need more infrastructure. Meanwhile, the protocol is great. You go over to the others, Ethereum and Lightning, whatever.
The exact opposite.
Exact opposite. They got fucking venture capital, talent, shit. They're building these elaborate things that work great, but their fundamental infrastructure is so fucked that it doesn't matter. And it's like,
they don't seem to care.
Can we just swap that?
I know. They seem to have enough faith that the big brains are going to solve it. Well, sure. In fact, this was actually one of the guy's arguments. He was essentially saying, the people that are involved in Bitcoin, these are just some of the smartest minds. They're going to solve these things. There was a line in there where he said something like, the tech might not be ready right now, but it'll be ready in the future. I'm like, okay, yeah. And 18 months from now, I'm going through some historical stuff on the Lightning Network, and it was literally back in 2015 that people were already.
Some more writing? Are you doing some more writing?
Oh yeah. I'm doing
Bitcoin
some more
history stuff.
Yeah. And it was, we're talking now 6 years ago. 6 years ago, people were already saying, no, you got to forget that on-chain transaction stuff. Lightning's right there. Or the tech is, just right. I'm sure it's more than that. I'm sure it goes farther back in history than that.
We need to do a poll, like which is more believable, 18 months till the Lightning Network, or 2 weeks to flatten the curve,
Okay, Isaac. So here's something crazy. Help me process this, okay? So for a long time, it was 18 months to the Lightning Network. And now we have the Lightning Network, and it doesn't work unless it's custodian. And there are some edge cases in which it can be functional. For the vast majority of use cases, it doesn't work. And yet people are still talking about it as if it's solving problems. I remember, help me understand this. I remember people were talking about—
You can't have a single Twitter thread where people don't, when you're like, yeah, but you can't do that on BTC because the fees are too high. They'll be like,
and they go,
Lightning Network.
but it doesn't work. Like, it made more sense when this was a diversionary tactic and they'd say, well, lightning will solve it, but it's here and it doesn't solve it. And people are talking about it. People who are developers who are working on it are talking about it as if it solves
it solves it. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
help me understand this.
It's, I mean, I would never have understood. I mean, I still don't understand it, but now I can totally believe it, because what do we see? We see things like this all over today, where it's like, take this COVID shot and then you want to wear a mask and you won't get sick. Oh, it turns out I took the COVID shot and I still got sick.
But
and works. That same person will say, but the COVID shot keeps you from, it works. And you're like, but you literally experienced it not working. And you still say it works. Like, you don't even say it with a caveat. You don't even say, well, it doesn't work all the time. You're like, no, it works, right? This is what it's like with the Lightning Network. It's like, but it's literally not working. Like, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's like we're in a space where it's possible for people to believe the opposite of what they directly experience, which is it's so cliche at this point, but it's straight out of Orwell. And it always sounded kind of ridiculous in that book. Like, oh, it's a metaphor. It's an exaggeration. It's not, though, apparently.
Oh, that's trouble. Okay, you're back.
Okay, it says recording.
That's trouble. That probably means it didn't record the other shit, right?
I have no idea. I certainly hope so, because this has been an absolutely fire conversation.
Yeah, it has been.
I was gonna ask you your thoughts on the responses, especially among BCH people, to seeing all these big blocks. What did you learn?
Well, I wanted to just finish that thought. So here's what we should do. So we're taking a gamble right now. Either this is all going to be lost and we're going to have we're just going to have to throw this into the garbage, or I guess that's the risk we're taking. So I did want to complete that thought, though. It really, on the Orwellian point, it's just amazing to me that people things are so fucked up right now that you have developer types that are building on something that doesn't work. They know it doesn't work. They're still appealing to it as a technical solution for problems, and they're raising money when they say the right words. They're getting social media accolades, of course, and they're successfully raising money for saying something that is patently not true. That they themselves, I don't think, know whether or not it's true or false. I could absolutely see now people, like the people getting the shot, and it harms them, and they go, well, that's okay, or it doesn't work. They get sick and they go, well, it still worked. I think we live in a world in which developers could literally be building technology that straightforwardly doesn't work, and they're like, well, I guess it probably does work because it's being built on Lightning, right? So maybe it works.
Sort of like,
you don't even know whether your tech works or not.
Well, it's this like consensus idea. There's this accumulated narrative that
exactly.
Well, all the smart people just say that it's going to get fixed, right?
Exactly.
That Ethereum,
or that
every
it works.
Single podcast you ever hear with someone talk, I'm really excited about Ethereum, blah, blah, blah. And well, but what about the gas fees? Yeah, but that's getting fixed as well with the new proof of I mean, for years, well, that's getting fixed. And because everyone says it, and all the really smart people seem to say it, and they seem to be comfortable putting their money into it, and they keep well, Lightning Network handles all that. It's like okay, I guess I can just relax and know that that's going to get fixed, because some smart people are probably just about to fix it. They keep saying they are, and nobody else seems concerned that it's actually not going to get fixed, and that maybe it can't get fixed. Nobody says that. Nobody talks that way. So what do I think? I'm smarter than all these crazy high level cryptography guys who are doing all this, they must have a fix. Why would they keep putting so much skin in the game if they didn't have a fix? Right? Like, I think people kind of get lulled into, okay, I guess I can be confident in it because of the sheer weight of people who are willing to put money and stuff into it. They must have something. And there doesn't have to be anything there,
And it works from the perspective of securing resources. I mean, you can do this until the Michael Saylor of the world's out of money, Yeah,
that's true. That's true. What'd you learn about, were BCH people really excited to say, look, we don't like BSV, but it's really awesome to see
Yeah,
that
that's what
blocks
happened.
can be that big and that it
Yeah,
can actually be handled. Maybe
yeah.
we, that's a good sign. We're excited for you guys.
I got my social media inboxes were filled up with BCH people going, Steve, I guess you were right. And I guess these big blocks were possible. Congratulations. We wish you well. No, it's the same thing. It's shifting the goalpost as they've done 50 times now. And it's not celebration. And now that instead of, the problem is block propagation, or the problem is the sync times, the problem is whatever, they just have the list of technical reasons why blocks that large are impossible. They've just gone down to the one that can't be argued against anymore. Well, it's just about a matter of centralization. If you're okay with there only being 120 nodes on the network, then of course you could have blocks that are 2 GB large. It's like, okay, well, now that we're not in technical arguments anymore, you found the argument that, you found Greg Maxwell's argument. Well done. Now you can say, it's just a spectrum. Now it's not about the size of blocks. Now we're just the people that, we want a middling amount of node decentralization.
Yep.
Node count on the network. That's how we're going to measure the health of the network.
And what's so funny about that is it assumes so much. Let's say you value node count to a huge degree. Just saying, well, look, there's only 120 nodes on the BSV network. Therefore, what BSV is doing is bad if you want lots of nodes. That doesn't follow. Has anyone actually done the math and said, okay, who's running these 120 nodes, non-mining nodes? What is it costing them to run nodes with blocks this big? Is it breaking things? And how hard would it be if there were, because it could just be that there's only 120 people that give a shit about running a node on BSV. Because BSV people in general don't think that running non-mining nodes is very important. It's not necessarily the case that the reason there's only 120 nodes is because there's only 120 people who are economically capable of affording the blocks that are coming through. Like, that's absurd. I bet you could have the same, like, I mean, I know a guy that just runs a node for shits and giggles. He's like, for BSV, and he's like, yeah, it's doing fine. I had no problem. It's got, it handled. He's got it with like a friend of his that has like a data warehouse server farm thing, and he just convinced them to let him run a BSV node in there. And it costs them a little bit of money, but they don't even care. It's not like anything big, and it's like his little pet project. So like, even just pointing to the number of nodes on BSV does not prove that is the only amount that's possible on BSV.
Of course, of course. Well, and also going with that argument, it's so short-sighted, because in the future, at scale, when you have so much value being pushed through the network, you're probably going to get an increase in the node count. Yeah, it might be more expensive, but you're going to have more parties who want access to that data. They want to be connected to the network. Yep. Do you know how much your friend is spending on nodes?
I don't. I'll have to ask him. I'd
be interested to know.
He's not spending any money himself, but he basically, because he knows someone who owns this data warehouse that they do, cloud, whatever, they do server stuff for a bunch of companies. It's a small enough amount where they've never complained about it. He just asked them, hey, would you mind if I spin up a node? And they're basically paying the cost of it. And they've never mentioned it. They don't give a shit. They've never, and he's like, I've got some ideas of ways that I could make that node actually make money for them. And I might pursue it, but they've never even asked or complained. So apparently it's not enough that they're taking notice,
If he's already a data warehouse, I'm sure it's trivial at this point.
Right, exactly. And like, and he knows them, but it's not like he's got a ton of social capital with them to where if it cost a lot, they'd be fine with it. Oh, it's okay. You're my buddy. It's like, he doesn't know them that well. He kind of does, but it's not enough to where they give a shit. So like, it can't be, anyway, but I'll have to ask him, because I'm actually curious about that.
Yeah, I am too.
But I also see a future where you've got a lot of nodes that are actually specializing in different things.
Yeah.
So like, hey, we're a node that we're only going to look at a certain type of transaction.
Yeah,
we're only going to look at the oper-turn data,
or
we're going to sell it to you. If you want to see it, we'll sell you certain types of data, and then you get this division of labor, this diversification. Of course, anybody who wants to can spin up a full node and can do everything if they want to. Maybe it costs a lot, whatever, but you'll get different use cases for different. You don't have to do everything and process everything.
Right. And why would you? No, the only people that need to be doing that are miners, at scale at least. And you can have people connected to the network without them being recorded on the official node count that are, operating as if they're miners without the mining part. Like you could have nodes of a network that are connected to miners via a different mechanism that are getting data from them that still contributes something toward decentralization in terms of a bunch of different people having access to the same information that could say if there's funny business going on, that would alert people if there's some problems, but they're not going to show up in the 128 count or whatever it is.
The goalpost shifting is so funny in so many directions. I mean, so many people, not just BCH, but especially BTC, that are like, what have they been saying this whole time? You literally can't have blocks this big. Well, then they start to get real big. Well, sure, that's easy if it's just one miner. Then you have two different miners consecutively. And then they all of a sudden say, yeah, but what's in those blocks is not real users. And you're like, that has nothing to do with the point.
No.
The point being discussed.
They say it's not transactions. These are data transactions. And then you have a block put out with 1 million transactions and they're like, okay, well, that doesn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's like, it just doesn't matter. It's like, but to me, that's a really sad thing to see people who are passionate about what Bitcoin can do, at least on a theoretical level, even if you disagree with the strategy or the approach of BCH or BTC or whatever, or BSV, even if you hate Craig Wright and whatever, even if you think this is a bunch of phony, as just a technologist, you have to find it kind of cool and kind of interesting to be like, hey, we've seen our first block that had more in fees than it did in block reward. That's kind of neat. That's kind of a milestone, right? It doesn't matter if it's on this shitty chain, whatever. It's just interesting. It's an interesting thing to see that it's possible and that there's at least miners who are, this is something that's being, like you would think it would at least be an interesting thing to note, Well,
it's good too for people who are skeptical of the metanet. Like I'm still not 100% sold on the metanet idea, the data on chain. I'm a pluralist. So I think people should try and markets will sort it out. I just don't know how much use is going to be there. But even in the scenario in which you don't have data transactions being the ones that are particularly valuable going forward, the fact that you could have blocks successfully 2 gigabytes in size, you can just imagine them filled with cash transactions. It's like if you get to the 1 gigabyte level, you have in spirit gotten to the 1 terabyte level. Like a difference between a gig and a terabyte, it's not actually that big a deal. So even for mid blockers, a lot of the BCH types, not all of them, just to see that you can go figure, the Bitcoin technology can successfully put out blocks that are this large that could account for, at the time, I remember in 2012 or so, maybe 2013, the big milestone was half gig blocks. People were saying to get to PayPal transactions, 100 transactions a second, something like that. Indefinitely, that was half gig blocks. So we've doubled that. So now we've four times that. We've 4x'd that mark. That was PayPal in 2012. So if you take the cash only approach, it's like, oh shit, that's almost game over. That has already happened in terms of the capacity of the network. That's fantastic.
Did you see this thing about Schnorr signatures? Schnorr. Yeah.
Schnorr.
Got it. On BSV. Did you see that?
I did see this. Yes. And I asked some folks about it. One of them hasn't gotten back to me. He's a technical type. The only response I got from non-BSV people to see if it was legit was Chris Pacia, who said, "Yeah, but why would you do that? Like that's a lengthy and expensive way. That's like unnecessary calculations to do it that way, versus just having one opcode that can do it." I'm like, okay, well, ground conceded. Once again, something that was completely impossible has been shown to be possible on BSV. My mind is still blown on that. Like, I don't understand all the technical details, but the idea.
So walk me through. So
Yeah.
you've done this for me so many times, and I have a really bad memory. I learn things and I only remember them when I need to use them. So for each of our 4 children, I have relearned everything about pregnancy and childbirth.
I thought you were going to say their names. I was like,
completely forgotten. Well, I need to know their names on a regular basis. Otherwise I would forget. But Schnorr signatures.
Yeah.
This is like a privacy enhancing thing, correct?
Yeah. So I don't know everything that can be done with it, but it's essentially a way to make it unclear which inputs went to which outputs.
Yep.
It's like a more complex way of doing coin join, essentially.
Okay.
So yeah, it's privacy enhancing.
And it's not supposed to have been possible on Bitcoin, which is one of Ethereum's big arguments.
Not supposed to have been possible. So I think I am highly confident if you were to take a poll of everybody in crypto 3 years ago, there would be almost nobody who would say that you could implement Schnorr signatures without an opcode change or with some fundamental change to the protocols. The idea that you're able to do it without that is just incredible to me. So, and remember, this was a big thing in the BCH and BSV split because they were saying, okay, we're going to be adding new functionality in. We want to do this thing so we can add Schnorr signatures, and this is a great success. And people like, I think Ryan Charles might have at the time was saying, look, you can do all of this stuff on BSV. It might be a little bit less efficient. It might be a little bit more clunky. The coding might be more difficult initially because we don't have like streamlined languages for it, but it can still be done. And he was like poo-poo out of existence because that sounds a lot like Craig Wright's Turing completeness argument that you could do everything with Bitcoin.
This is where mythology is so important to say, look, the fundamental, the foundation here, the underlying infrastructure or whatever, you can really build anything on top of it. Now, some of those things, if you fucked with the fundamental, if you fucked with the foundation and did something to it, then maybe building this one particular thing would be easier. But it also compromises the integrity of the foundation in some ways, and it starts to get overly complex. So if you keep that simple, yes, it might take you more levels. You might have to add more in between tooling things in your stack before you get to this. But if we try to make the foundation a catch-all that lets us do anything, then it will never be set in stone, right? It will always be morphing, and then you'll add things and it'll be so big, you'll break things you didn't even know needed to be unbroken and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So let's just leave that. Same with the Turing complete thing. It doesn't have to be technically Turing complete if it can be functionally Turing complete.
Right.
And so like that mythology in BSV, BCH didn't go as far as like maybe the Ethereum guys or whatever, but they didn't fully embrace that mythology. They were like, no, we gotta keep tweaking with the foundation itself.
Look, I just don't think they understood. I don't think they understood that you can apparently build a lot of complexity into Bitcoin as a system, maybe not specifically the Bitcoin scripting language, but one way or another, you can get functionality that they thought you could only get by changing opcode or adding new opcodes. You can get that in existing Bitcoin architecture.
Sometimes
that's awesome.
I wonder if like that's kind of what drove Ryan X Charles like off the deep end or something, was he started to understand everything Bitcoin can do, and being the only one that understood it started to just make him go crazy. Like lose it, like, because again, he was very early in seeing a lot of these things, even the Turing completeness thing, at least according to his story, him and his business partner kind of independent of Craig sort of stumbled on this. And then but I think there's like, when you're in a world where you see something that nobody else sees,
and everybody calls you crazy.
Right in front of them.
Yeah.
Right.
I wouldn't know anything about that. No, it's a situation I'm in a lot, actually. I think in Ryan's case, the sleeping pills that had something to do with it. I remember listening to his story on that. So. Yeah. But it doesn't help. It doesn't help. Like if you know that you are closer to truth and you have arguments that anybody can follow along, if they weren't blinded by rage and confusion, and everybody calls you crazy, it's like, well, I guess I'll have to be. I guess I accept the appearance of being crazy because these ideas are actually correct. Yeah. I mean, I don't think all of them were correct from Ryan. There's a couple I can think of that were incorrect, but the idea of the functionality of Bitcoin being like, universal, that seems to be, I have seen evidence that that is the case. I don't know if that's going to be universally true, right? Code is so stinking complex. I could imagine things that like, no, you can't actually get this functionality. You have to, I mean, maybe that's the case, but right now the argument, the strength of the argument is with the BSV people.
Yeah. Yeah. There was also, since we last talked, a whole lot of activity in the legal political sphere. First, you had SEC and various agencies, more and more and more of these kind of crackdowns and warnings. You got Binance, you got like a whole lot of, basically the regulators are getting more and more active in threats, in actual things, in fines. None of it has resulted in like a major, like one of the biggest exchanges gets shut down and their people go to prison or whatever. But just a lot of like,
Not yet.
a lot more than just sniffing around now, right? There's some real poking and prodding going on. And then you have this infrastructure bill that gets thrown into it, basically regulating anyone who does anything with crypto, as if basically having them fall under KYC, more or less. From what I can understand, just glancing, was like, even if you're a developer, potentially, you could have to store every customer's information that's doing any transaction. Whatever. It was just a horribly worded thing. And you saw all the BTC people, all the code is law people. Suddenly code was not law. Suddenly they were very interested in law, and they became lobbyists. And I don't know where that stands. I don't think they got their whatever they wanted, their amendment.
They didn't get the amendment thing.
No, and then their amendment was basically like, oh no, this should only apply to proof of stake.
Yeah, right. To not BTC.
But I don't know how you interpret all this stuff. And these are, a lot of separate events, but I see sort of a broader thrust that is the political class. And again, if only Bitcoin would have just fucking raised its blocks from the get-go and moved fast, because the political class moves really slow, right? There's little elements of it. I think certainly people in like intelligence and cyber community have probably been a part of Bitcoin from the beginning. Yeah, and they're poking around and they're using it in their various sting operations and like Silk Road shit and whatever. So there's some elements of government that have been savvy on it, but it's kind of like a small little specialized. The broader, more political, more public facing components where you got regulators who are appointed or prosecutors who are elected, or, certainly Congress people, whatever. You got some of them coming out as champions of, I'm a Bitcoin champion and we need to blah, blah, blah. And, they're sensing the grift. Oh, there's a constituency here I can appeal to, and I won't really lose anything with my own constituency. And then you got people on the other side, regulators, all these games going on. To me, it says, okay, the time where regulators were a little too slow and a little too, because they're regulators and bureaucratic and a little bit of sleep at the wheel and whatever, it's over. It's coming to a quick end. So how's it going to play out? The BSV, Craig Wright types seem to think, oh, this is great because all governments do is stop bad people from doing things, and they're going to stop all the bad people, and then it will be great. The sort of the cypherpunk BTC people have until recently been like, they can't touch us. They're not going to do anything. And I think both are really naive. I think the reality is we're going to see this jockeying, like, who can we capture? Is it worth more for us to kill someone or to make them pay us tribute for life? Is it worth more for us to get our man in their team, on their board, and have some control, or for them to have to get a man in Washington to pay us bribes? And it's going to be different case by case. There's going to be some things that are shut down to make an example, some that are shut down because they're a threat to the state, some that are simply co-opted or coerced, some that are sort of corralled. It's gonna get more messy. And basically the bottom line I see is, and yes, this began years ago, but now it's really begun in a more publicly visible way. The process of the libertarian sort of attributes of Bitcoin or crypto, the parts that are potentially threatening the status quo and beneficial freedom, are just going to be neutered increasingly, and you're going to be left with a shell of it. But the goal is to neuter those while keeping the rhetoric alive, so that you have this thing where people are believing that they are supporting this freedom enhancing thing that's actually completely the opposite, which I think you can see a pattern of with, like, the Edward Snowden leaks and stuff revealed that we thought we had this great technology that was separate from whatever. Turns out that like NSA has everything, right? I think it's something like that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty close. The only change I would make is that I don't know how many people are going to believe that this is a great freedom enhancing technology. I mean, there's going to be a lot of clueless people, I guess, but I think the people that matter are just going to, I think they've already capitulated. And so if they are faced with the trade-off of pump the price and give up any libertarian aspects of Bitcoin, they're going to take that trade. They already took that trade-off.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that you're going to see more regulation. I think what's going to happen is it's just going to be a moneymaker for the state, and the early adopters that have influence are going to keep bullshitting people because it makes them money and it makes the state money. So, and it'll be a distraction. It definitely has captured a lot of libertarian-esque minds who don't know any better. So it's a great trap for the state.
Yeah, it's so funny. You see people that will literally say stuff like, oh yeah, like libertarian people, like, oh, all these people trying to advocate for this or fight for this or write articles or literally any activity you can imagine. Not all of which are effective, many of which are not effective, but whatever. Anything you can imagine, it's all useless. There's literally only one thing you can do to end the state, and that's to buy Bitcoin and hold it. And that will end the state.
Yeah.
And
right.
And I found it. I found the ticket to liberty. It's this and
just
nothing
before
else.
You.
Right.
I found it. Just so happened to find it just before other buyers of the same asset. Isn't that nice?
Yes. And it's like just the naivete of that. Again, and coming back to what we said in the first half of this, that hopefully doesn't get deleted and swallowed because we got cut off. But you can't escape the foundational role that human belief plays in the type of society you have. You just can't. You can't buy and hold Bitcoin and then the state just dissolves. If people believe that Bitcoin's worthless, it will be. If people believe that the state is wonderful and needs to be really big, or if they just tolerate it, they don't have to like it or believe it, they have to tolerate it, then it will be, right? Like, it's just, again, I'm not saying that there's nothing valuable about, the potential of things like Bitcoin. Of course, I mean, a currency that's not controlled by the central bank is an awesome dream. And even if it's not achieved, people talking about it and wanting to achieve it can open some minds and can shift public belief. Like, I'm not saying it's useless. I'm just saying it's so much more complex. It's like what you talk about with economists. It's like one variable in a thing that we can never really know all the variables, but we can sort of try to understand some of them. And if you just isolate this one single thing and say, haha, when I look at this, if enough people buy Bitcoin, then the dollar will get ruined and Bitcoin will be the last man standing.
It's ridiculous.
And once Bitcoin's the last man standing, you can't wage war because you can't inflate, and therefore the state goes away. Like, it's almost beyond belief, some of these people,
Well, I think it is beyond belief. And I think what hyper Bitcoinization turned into, I don't know about turned into, because I think it was partly this, but something like a predatory scheme to get a lot of people to buy Bitcoin. And it sort of made sense when, if you were talking about big block Bitcoin, then I could see the merit in saying, listen, general public, you're too stupid to understand anything, but you buying Bitcoin actually makes things better because it makes me richer and I'm a libertarian, so that's good. But also you're buying into a system that is the most outside of state control that anyone has been. I could see an argument that, especially if there were more privacy features in Bitcoin, that if you have the ability to put your assets into this cryptocurrency, that you are diminishing state power and you're increasing your ability to operate outside of the control of the state. I think there is merit to that. But the tech was captured and doesn't work anymore. So the argument, the leftover argument of the hyper Bitcoinization is a cool concept, but like some of the variables have changed and now it's a totally different dynamic. And now it's like you're buying into something that you're not going to be able to use in commerce, is totally regulated. And that feds are already using to successfully track down criminals all over the world. It's like, it's not what It used to be, and it's not necessarily freedom enhancing. And another thing, one of these stupid monovariable analyses is the whole inflation thing. It's like, well, Bitcoin is inflation proof, so that's why it's going to increase freedom. No, because I can imagine a scenario, which is already the case, that the institutions that are holding your Bitcoin for you claim that they have a particular amount of Bitcoin on hand. They don't. That's called inflation.
Yes.
Why in the world would you think that's not going to be the case?
It's
because
already a part of it.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's literally already a part of it. So that's another one of those single variable things. They can't inflate it. Well, technically, if you're only looking at Satoshis on the blockchain, that might be right. But there's a lot more than that one metric. There's a lot more circulation of Bitcoin than that one metric.
Well, and two, just like, hey, why can't it just be like one tool that could be really great or could be kind of good somewhere in there? And for certain circumstances, it could be really great. And for others, it could not be very useful at all. Like the ability to own a gun. If you're a libertarian, you're like, yeah, it's great when everyone has the ability to own a gun. Actually owning a gun, that's not a guarantee of your personal liberty. It's not going to end tyranny once and for all. But there are certain circumstances in which it can absolutely protect you from having your liberty transgressed by state or other actors. Other circumstances where it's useless, right? It's one tool.
Right,
no one would say, look, the only thing you need to do to bring about a libertarian society is just buy a gun and then sit and wait. You're good to go.
And they don't notice when you can't buy bullets for the gun anymore. They're like, no, I got the gun. It's like, no, you've missed. There's more to that calculation.
Yeah. So it's like, Bitcoin and then all of the things that it's birthed. I think, digital tokens and crypto and all this stuff in general, it is one tool in the toolkit of living a good life, and in some cases a more free life, but it's a constant chase. It comes with dangers as well, right? Just like buying a firearm. If you had to register it, then maybe you're actually giving up some of your freedom. Now more state agencies know about you than before, right? Like if you're doing KYC and you own Bitcoin, is it
right?
But then there's this constant dance. Well, maybe there's a privacy coin or there's a mixer, and then it's like being abreast of that and utilizing those tools in your overall quest to live your best life is awesome. This myopic idea that like you just buy Bitcoin and then you're saved is
yeah, but you can't take that at face value. I mean, that's not what's going on. That argument is buy Bitcoin to make me wealthier.
Yeah, and I think most people who say that don't consciously, they either don't realize it or they've justified and fudged the truth to themselves so much that they start to believe their own bullshit, and they can tell themselves, no, I'm not just trying to pump the price. I really come, like, because it's very easy to come to a deep belief of something if that something happens to be like really, really rewarding to you.
Right? Right. It's like the inverse of, that I don't remember who said it, that quip that you can't essentially like pay a man to conclude that his job is unnecessary.
Yeah. You can't. Yeah. It's very hard to convince a man of something that his salary depends on.
Exactly. True. That one. Yeah. That's like the inverse of it.
Right. So let me see here. There was a couple other things. I guess we'll bring it home because we've been on, even though we didn't record all of it, and who knows if all of these two chunks got recorded both, but we'll bring it home. I was gonna get into this Ian Grigg video talking about Satoshi origins and some very interesting tidbits in there. I was hoping Derek would be in here because he uncovered some interesting stuff with Bitcoin.com, being registered before Bitcoin.org. So sort of the Satoshi stuff, but maybe we save that for another conversation.
Yeah, more numpties.
More than any closing, any other thoughts, Steve?
Nope.
That's it.
Not a thought in the head.
Not a single thought. All right, man. Nope. I'm really hoping.
Me too.
I'm really hoping we get the first half because I love this convo.
That was a good talk. Yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you next time.
See ya.